judges, well, they decided to dismiss a case involving a botched raid, aggressive, violent behavior of the police, put the woman up for a mass who was the victim of this. In Dallas, Miss Karen Jimerson was mistakenly targeted during a no-knock raid. The cops were at the wrong house. This was roughly 5 years ago. She filed a lawsuit. Then she had to file a second appeal after her civil lawsuit was thrown out by the Fifth Circuit in April. With millions watching and many people benefiting from this program called Indisputable, we just need 1% of the viewers to become a paid member so we can continue to bring this content to you. Now back to the show. So let me give you details on the raid and I will give you the update. So the blundered raid on Karen Jimerson's home in Texas on March 27, 2019 led to a terrifying ordeal where SWAT team troops smashed the windows of her home, detonated a flashbang grenade, forced the woman and her children to the floor at gunpoint before realizing their mistake. The lawsuit claims that Lieutenant Mike Lewis had assembled the raid team at the wrong house when he realized the error at the moment. He then did nothing to confirm the address of the real target, a suspected stash house to the right of where the officers were assembled. Jimerson's house was on the cops' left. A bright porch light at a neighboring home made it difficult for police to see the address. And instead of taking a closer look, Lewis guessed wrong and chose the house on the left. The lawsuit states this is called negligence. Negligence in this formation may not be criminal, but it definitely is civil, right? You did actions that led to the detriment of another. You did not do it intentionally, but you were negligent. Simple. So the warrant indicated that there should be or should have been a fence blocking the front porch. Why? It's in the warrant. And garage of the suspect house, however, the residence they went to didn't have a fence. It did not have a front porch. It did not have a garage. All of these things are described in the warrant itself. Instead, the officers marched up a wheelchair ramp. It's not in the warrant to describe the home. They marched up a wheelchair ramp. None of them said, hey, fellas, it doesn't say wheelchair ramp on the warrant here. That was never mentioned in arrest papers, and reached the front door of Jimerson's home before crashing inside as the children were sound asleep. Traumatized those babies and the mother. You had this cacophony of shattered glass, explosions, shouting, and weapons being echoed through the house, jarring everyone awake to a nightmare with guns aimed at them. Jimerson, who had just gotten out of the shower, was confronted by officers while still in the bathroom. She was ordered to get face down. It was only then that one of the officers shouted, "Wrong house," which ended the siege without shots fired, but the family was still severely shaken. How do you go to sleep after that? Seriously, how do you go to sleep? After guns pointed at you, you realize the flashbang grenade smoke is still in the house. You got to clear that out of the home. How do you do this? Your windows are broken. How do you control the temperature at night? What do you do? These officers broke everything. There's more. Lewis later admitted, the officer later admitted that the raid violated the family's constitutional rights. Still, the 3-judge panel from the Fifth Circuit Court ruled, well, even though he said it, the officer could not be legally held accountable for the mishap. What? The judges concluded that while the Supreme Court says officers must make a, quote, reasonable effort to be sure that they have correct details before a raid, it was not clearly established that Lewis was required to do this. This is when judges become defense attorneys for the police. The officer says what I did was a violation of their constitutional rights. I should have verified that information. Lewis may actually be a decent cop who admitted the truth, who said, I messed up. This is on me. Judges say, well, you know what? Not really there, Lewis. We're gonna rule in this way for you because we're allowed to, because of the ambiguity of the Supreme Court ruling. It gives them leverage here. There's more. Despite the police's colossal miscalculation, the 3-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit ruled that the commander of the military-style raid could not reasonably have known that he needed to ensure he had the correct address before ordering the raid, and that the case was dismissed on the grounds of qualified immunity. There it is again. Jimerson's attorneys have asked the full Fifth Circuit in-bank panel to reconsider the case while vowing to take the action to the Supreme Court, which has reversed several previous things by the Fifth Circuit due to clear constitutional violations. Put them up full mass. I'm confident, and I don't say this much about the Supreme Court, but based on previous court rulings, I'm confident that this is not an open and shut situation. If the Supreme Court decides to take it, it may get overturned, meaning what these judges have done may get overturned based on previous Supreme Court rulings. According to court documents, the 3-judge panel of the case was made of circuit judges Leslie Southwick on the left, Carl Stewart in the center, and James Dennis on the right. Dennis, ironically, was the only judge who dissented from the majority vote and did not agree that qualified immunity should have been allocated in this case. He agreed that the officer did in fact violate the civil rights, constitutional rights of this family, and thus qualified immunity does not apply. Why? Because you have to qualify the immunity. And he says there is no qualification for the immunity here. He worked well outside of his job to do this. I think about the potential of emotional damage they created on these children and the mother. The physical damage to the property, the inconvenience it created to their life beyond that. All right, Tehran, this is a hell of a story. The officer said what he did was wrong and was in fact a violation. As I said before, he may actually be a decent cop who made a horrible mistake. Judges come in, this should be open and shut. Judges come in, they basically start operating as his defense attorney, and he did not require one. He didn't ask for one.
So here's my concern. My concern is threefold. First of all, every time you say there's more, my blood boils. Every time you say there's more, I'm just like, oh. We have these 3 judges. Concern number 1, that these 3 judges were the ones who basically defended the qualified immunity clearly, even though it goes against the letter of the law. Reasonable reason. If I was supposed to pick up a television from that address and went to the wrong address and picked it up, they'd still charge me with felony.
That's right.
They wouldn't say, oh, well, it was, you tried to figure out which address. They just charged me. Okay. So we had Judge Brett Kavanaugh II and Clarence Thomas Jr. III on that bench. Thankfully, we did have one judge who gives me hope for the law for the future because he made the right ruling. Secondly, never mind the criminal charge. Let's look at the civil charge, in which civil cases have a lower burden of proof, than a criminal charge because it's between the 2 entities. It's not a criminal situation. I can understand qualified immunity because you don't want to set a criminal precedent for future cases. But in a civil case, you found no guilt in a civil case? How is that even possible? And the last thing is, who's watching the watchers? That's the biggest problem. So you have the police and the judges all working hand in hand. This is why we need an independent third party who is not tied to them. I know prosecutors who feel a certain way, but they're afraid to go against a judge or speak up.
That's right.
For what's right, because they're like, well, I have to deal with that judge 1,000 times. You're only dealing with them once. I have to deal with them 1,000 times. I can't have that go against me. These are the problems with our current legal system.
You make such an incredible point. That's a policy point. And that policy point is the system itself requires an independent third party because the politics that play in the everyday dynamics of just going to work with the same people that you possibly are prosecuting is never going to give you a great benefit of holding folk accountable as long as you have that social dynamic in place.